Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I want to thank my latest Patreon subscriber, Konstantinos, for his support and all my other Patreon subscribers for their continued support. This podcast would struggle to continue without them, and my Patreon page is quickly becoming a great place to hang out and talk about the world of conducting. There'll be more about my Patreon page later on in this episode. Today, I conduct a conversation with a British conductor whose career has really grown over the last few years. He studied with Sir Roger Norrington and has specialised in historically informed performance, while also becoming an expert in conducting orchestras live to film in concert. It's a pleasure to welcome Ben Palmer. Ben, lovely to see you and to chat to you. How are you?
I'm really well, Mike. Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very good. It feels like the start of a new year, and hopefully things gradually return to some sort of normality, whatever normality becomes, who knows?
Yeah, I think we may have all forgotten what normal feels like by now.
Yeah, exactly. I've done my usual thing. I've done some homework and I've done some digging, but some of it is off the top of my head, and I seem to remember that you were a trumpet player. Trumpet was your instrument. How did music first come into your life? Musical family or not?
Quite a lot of my family are musical, but nobody was foolish enough to do it for a living.
Yeah.
I think my earliest kind of musical memory is watching and listening to musicals. So things like Oliver and The Sound of Music. And I was born in Denmark and then lived in France. Born in Denmark and then Amsterdam and France. So moved to the UK when I was 8.5. So we used to have quite a lot of long car journeys to go and kind of visit grandparents and things. And we used to have the tapes of these musicals, and we used to sing along to them, and just know all of the words to absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And I think when I was 7. I decided that I wanted to play the trumpet. My dad sings and used to play the horn, so I think that was probably the kind of catalyst for that. And so we found a flugelhorn at a kind of flea market thing, like really old French flugelhorn. And we found a trumpet teacher who was called Monsieur Oldman. And he played the trumpet, and he arrived on a motorbike, which was when I was 7 years old. That was pretty much like having a visit from God. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, so I kind of started playing the trumpet a bit, and I enjoyed it, and it was it was fun, but it was never anything particularly serious. And I did that through school, and then when I was, I think, 15, I finally did my grade 8. So, it was sort of not particularly kind of high achieving instrumentalist or anything, but did my grade 8. And that was finally the time that my parents thought it would be okay to buy me a new trumpet. And suddenly I got this new instrument, and all the things that I'd been sort of really struggling with were suddenly much easier, and I wanted to then go back and do my grade 8 again. But I then sort of got slightly really totally obsessed with it, and literally played every day for a year, and used to take a mouthpiece on holiday with me and all this kind of thing. And it was at that time, I think, that I got a place in my county youth orchestra, Suffolk Youth Orchestra, and in our first course, which I guess must have been the Easter course, I think when I was 15 years old, I think, we played a couple of movements of Tchaik 5, and I distinctly remember not sleeping properly for kind of 2 or 3 nights after that, because it was just the most exciting thing I had ever experienced. And it was like a kind of switch being flicked, and that was it, and I was just hooked on music, and so from that moment onwards, before that I'd wanted to be a cartoonist. But from that moment, that was kind of it. Music for me all the way, really.
So who was conducting the Suffolk County Youth Orchestra way back when?
Yeah, it's a fantastic guy called Philip Shaw, who only retired a couple of years ago, and I mean, I know this is a sort of question that comes up. He was the first person that I really sort of noticed as being a conductor. And I mean, I think, you know, sort of technically, I've definitely played for sort of better people, but he had this amazing way of just somehow bringing, I don't know, 90 kids together in a way that just produced these incredible performances. And he said things in rehearsals that still pop into my mind on a kind of weekly basis. You know, I remember once we were playing, what was it, Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony, and the exposition repeat, you know, there's that little do-dee-dum, do-dee-dum, and the dee-da-dum, dee-da-dee-dum, the little rubato.
Yes.
And a couple of people on the repeat weren't sort of really watching and just sort of did what he'd done the first time. And he said, when I repeat myself, it means something. When I repeat myself, it means something. When I repeat myself, so he wasn't explaining what he just used it as an example, and it just kind of blew everyone's minds. And from that moment on, any time that I've done an exposition repeat, I've sort of thought about whether it might be nice to say something different the second time. You know, just loads and loads and loads of things like that. And he was just amazing. He was really inspiring, and obviously, you know, as you know, the sort of relationship between principal trumpet and conductor is a really important one. And as I sort of gradually made my way up through the ranks from kind of third trumpet to principal trumpet for my last few years, I learned a huge amount from him, and, you know, really big influence on my life musically and as a conductor.
Well, it sounds like we were both lucky in the fact that my county youth orchestra conductor, when I joined when I was 15 and stayed till I was 20, was a guy called Alan Vincent. And again, you know, he was a guy who we all looked up to and respected, and said amazing things, and we did amazing concerts. I know some youth orchestras don't always have that luck of having somebody who's in it for all of the right reasons, who might not be, you know, a technician like a Marzell or a Kleiber or whoever, but who just gets the job done, and it enthuses people. You know, I remember playing Heldenlebe when I was 15 years old, and you know, Mahler 2 were later on, and Belshazzar's and Elgar 2, and just amazing concerts. And you look back and you thank these people. I have seen him since, you know, and thanked him greatly for it. But yeah, we were lucky, really, weren't we, to have a youth orchestra? I mean, some counties don't have them now.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other thing that, you know, to which I'm really grateful to Philip and the youth orchestra for, was that it was really the first time that I fell in love with music that didn't just have really awesome trumpet parts.
Yes.
You know, I remember, you know, we were doing the Barber Violin Concerto, which actually, of course, does also have awesome trumpet parts. But
it's got a bloody horrible bit for the trumpet as well.
Absolutely. But luckily I was playing second, so just it's that fantastic bit in the last movement.
Yes.
And then the second trumpet muted goes bip bop. But I just remember listening to that oboe solo at the beginning of the second movement and just not believing that anything could be so beautiful. You know, because that's the thing, is when you sort of come to it a little bit later in life, you're kind of a little bit perhaps behind some of these kids who've, you know, been playing in orchestras since they were nothing years old and know all the music. So there was definitely some catching up to do.
But I think there's also, I've realized since I stopped playing, which will be 8 years in July this year, that actually the violin was my way into orchestras, but it was actually orchestras I loved. I was never really a big fan of Paganini and Wieniawski and Sarasate or any of that rubbish. And, you know, playing the violin parts, while some were much more interesting than others, frankly, often I couldn't care if I loved the music. You know, most violinists complain about Bruckner because it's endless tremolo. I loved playing Bruckner. Tremolo, bad back or not, I love the music. So to me, I've realized, you know, actually it was just my way. I could have been good enough at any other instrument. It was the orchestra I wanted to do, not play the violin, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I was just saying to a couple of colleagues a couple of days ago, because we were talking about my dark past as a trumpet player in another life, and I was saying to them that I'm fairly certain that if I was, as a trumpet player, sitting in my orchestra now that I was conducting, I would hate myself. I was really, by the time I was, I guess, kind of 18, 19, when I was kind of principal of the youth orchestra, you know, really kind of got to be the sort of person who put their hand up and asked the conductor actually if the Great Gate of Kiev could move on a little bit because we're all dying here. And, you know, just definite opinions about how the music should go, and absolutely no shame about expressing them. So yeah, I think it was definitely playing in orchestras that made me. I used to be a bit too lazy to count bars rest, so I used to bring miniature scores in and follow them in my bars rest. And you know, I was also at university, started studying as a composer, so it was those things that sort of made me interested in understanding a little bit about how the orchestra worked and was put together. And I think it was that sort of seeing it from both sides of being a composer and an orchestral player that made me feel as if I have quite strong opinions about how I felt the music ought to go. So I think it was probably heading in the direction of conducting anyway from that, really.
University was Birmingham. I have a feeling we met.
We did, exactly. Yeah. Yes. I think Suzanne came to you for a lesson or something, or I can't remember, but I remember absolutely. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. And you did your degree in music and also stayed on and did an MPhil in composition. Did you at any stage during your, well, I'm guessing 5 or 6 years at Birmingham University, start conducting and even have any lessons in conducting? When did conducting really start? Because so far it hasn't yet.
Yeah, I remember, because I was thinking about this, because I knew you'd ask. I distinctly remember at school once taking a string orchestra rehearsal for about 5 minutes. And I think that was the first and only time at that sort of age. Yeah. When I was at university, I think it was at the end of my second year, I think I applied. I'd sort of auditioned to conduct some of the university ensembles and was given the wind band. And so, yeah, and it just sort of started from there. And then in my third year, I did the Summer Festival Opera. So we did Marriage of Figaro and took the orchestra on tour. Did that a couple of times, and started doing, I think the first symphony I conducted was Mahler 1, all these sort of very over ambitious things that young conductors just go, great, let's do that. In the Adrian Bolt Hall. I was extremely lucky to have lots of opportunities at Birmingham to do lots of playing, lots of composing, and then once I sort of started getting a bit hooked on it, because it was around that time, I guess, after my undergrad. So I guess when I was 22 or so, I basically just one day totally lost my nerve playing the trumpet. I was about to go on stage and do first trumpet in Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, and I just thought, I can't do this. So I grabbed a mate to come on with me and bump, and sort of let him do some of the kind of scary bits. And that was just sort of it. And it was really downhill from then on. I just really totally fell out of love with playing the trumpet. And it was at that time when I was a postgrad, I helped out a bit with the undergrad composition teaching. And so we used to be given these undergrad student pieces that were literally still warm from the printer, loose sheets that had just been printed out. And we used to, rehearse those and play them through and record them. And those were kind of really my first steps as a conductor. And I think I realized at that moment that in comparison to playing the trumpet, conducting was much less scary because you don't make any noise. And basically, if you've done your homework and you're prepared and you know what you're doing, or hopefully in the case of these student pieces where you just got given the piece and had to just conduct it at first sight, if you could read it quickly enough and absorb it and kind of get to the nuts and bolts of the piece quickly, that was much less terrifying. So I think I fell very deeply in love with conducting because I knew that I just didn't really have the temperament to be a trumpet player professionally.
So still no lessons, and the next thing I read is or is Covent Garden Symphonia in '07 that you founded that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I when I was at Birmingham in my third year, I did a final recital on the trumpet, and I took composition, and there was a sort of a Birmingham Contemporary Music Group was on ensemble in association with the university. So we got our third year student pieces played through by the BCMG. And the workshop that year was conducted by James Macmillan, so that was fantastic. And I was lucky enough that my piece was chosen to sort of win the prize and be played in a BCMG concert. And so that was then the sort of next academic year, and Diego Masson came to conduct that concert. And I sort of just rather cheekily asked if he might come and watch me take a rehearsal of the University New Music Ensemble, which he very kindly did. He got in a cab and came all the way to the university and watched me, and then told me what he thought afterwards. And he said, "Hey, you should come and do my course at Darrington." And by which point I think the deadline for applying had already passed, but I sort of sent an application anyway, and was given a place. And so I did that in 2004 and 5 and 6. So that was, I think, three weeks in the summer with an extremely good orchestra of, you know, very, very high level amateurs and sort of pros, basically having a sort of jolly busman's holiday thing. And I think there was usually 6 or 7 of us on the course, and I think the orchestra was there something like 9 till 5 for 6 days a week. So on that first Dartington course in 2004, I did more conducting in those 3 weeks than I'd done in my entire life. And it was just the most amazing thing with Diego, because he was very much not the sort of teacher who would say, do it like this. He'd say, you what you did here, that didn't work, that was a bit shit, don't do that, don't do what I do, that would also be shit, you have to do your own thing, but don't do what you did, that wasn't clear. You know, he was just really he was really good at kind of helping you find your own way, but not being prescriptive about what to do. And the things that I'm really grateful to him for, the thing that he was really, really good about was always getting in and out of fermatas and upbeats and things, and, you know, starting up if something's on a second beat, you know, where the baton should be to approach any kind of new section.
They're the things that we, when we first start, you can feel that your arms are in the wrong place, and you feel, well, how do I go from here to there? How do I get out of this bar? You know, you haven't realized that you've got to prepare it in the first place. You know, it's like playing a shot in a cricket match. You know, if your feet are in the wrong position, there's no way you can play the sweep shot. You know, you're just going to fall over. And it's exactly the same with conducting.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing, is that he was very, as I've said, you know, very good about sort of letting us find our own way, but there were also and he was also very big on making sure that we didn't kind of choreograph our movements and just do the same thing, you know, pre-plan your moves. But there were, essentially, he taught us that there are some rules that in some places you need to do this particular thing, otherwise your gestures will not be understood. And that was absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful to him. It was really, and you know, we did amazing repertoire, and we did an opera every year. And as I say, it was a little bit like a sort of you know, service and MOT for your conducting each year. So that was my sort of first experience of any kind of teaching. And you know, I went and had a session with Sakari Ormo when I was in Birmingham, and took him something, and he very kindly chatted to me for an hour. And I went to speak to Colin Davis once. But you know, I'm a bit of an imposter. I've never sort of really studied conducting properly, just sort of hopefully gradually become slightly less bad at it.
Well, as you know, there are plenty of people who've come on the podcast who haven't had lessons either. You know, and there are plenty of conductors out there who've had a million lessons with thousands of different people who just simply haven't made it because they haven't got what it is, or what an orchestra wants, or they've got a personality trait that upsets orchestras, or it could be for any reason. How qualified you are is irrelevant. You know, really, the minute you start opening your mouth and moving your arms around, an orchestra wants your help and your input and your musicality, and it doesn't matter. They're not going to look at your CV.
Yeah, that's completely true. But yeah, no, I came to the Royal Academy in London in 2005 to start a PhD, because I knew actually that if I studied conducting, I'd never do any composing. So I thought I'd try and study composing and try and do some conducting on the side. And of course, I absolutely hated the course. And after a matter of, the sort of 3 months into a 3-year course, gave it up and applied for the master's conducting course at the Academy and got into the second round, but didn't get a place. So I sort of thought, right, what do I do now? Yeah, as you say, 2007, sort of got together a bunch of players, and that's now coming up to 15 years, which is amazing. So we're sort of very lucky to those first couple of years when there was no no funding and no money for things, people playing for free, and then gradually starting to be asked by festivals and things to go and do some concerts for which there was some money or a lot of money, and just gradually trying to build it up into what's now a professional chamber orchestra.
And what sort of projects do the Covent Garden Sinfonia do in a normal year, pre-COVID? And how many would you try and do, or is it just as it comes, as it works out?
Yeah, I mean, in those sort of first years, we started doing a couple of concerts a year, and we sort of gradually worked our way through a Beethoven cycle, and we did Sibelius Symphony Fantastique, and we did Sibelius 2, basically just things I wanted to do that I thought people would enjoy playing and coming to. And then, of course, once you start paying the musicians, it becomes much more difficult to put on big things. And so actually what we really were doing from, I guess, sort of 2008-9 onwards, really, was doing lots of these arrangements that have only just become cool in the last 2 years, kind of Mahler symphonies arranged by Irvinstein and all this kind of thing. So we've done lots and lots of that sort of stuff, lots of string orchestra repertoire, so kind of John Adams Shaker loops and, Adams chamber symphonies, that kind of thing. Mieux la création du monde. The really nice thing is we've got a kind of team of principal players and a really nice, but actually very regular kind of pool of people on whom we can call. So in the last couple of years now, I've been a bit busier doing other things. There have not been so many concerts, which I'm sad about. And of course, in 2020, I was thinking, right, now is really the time to actually start doing a few more CGS concerts. But then, of course, we all know what happened next. So yeah, I'm sort of currently plotting, basically. But I think the nice thing is that even though we don't see each other that often, the last thing was back in back of end of November, and we did a recording for the BFI for a silent film, which actually we're doing a live show of in a couple of weeks, hopefully. We're not seeing each other for a few months, but it just feels like getting back in the saddle. And we all know exactly where we are and how we play, and I barely have to do anything because they know what I'm going to say before I open my mouth.
Now, a few episodes ago, I had the great pleasure of talking to Sir Roger Norrington, who is the next big name to appear on your biography. You were assistant to Sir Roger Norrington for between 2011 and 2016. How did you first meet? How did it all come about? And what was your role as his assistant?
Well, as I never tire of reminding Roger, I basically discovered him because I found his recording of the Magic Flute in a bargain bin in HMV. It was really cheap, so I bought it because I was learning it at the time.
Yeah.
And I knew there was this guy called Roger Norrington, but I didn't really know who he was or kind of what he stood for.
Yeah. I
had, since my very, very kind of first steps as a conductor, been very interested in historical performance. I mean, as I said to you before, my first things really were conducting contemporary pieces where it's just a given that you just follow all the instructions and you do what the composer asks of you, and that's just and one of the things that I'd found very frustrating as a trumpet player was why the conductors for whom I was playing were not also following those instructions in later repertoire.
Yes.
In earlier repertoire. I mean, in earlier repertoire. So for me, one of the really kind of central things about wanting to conduct was trying to, essentially be historically informed, I guess. And so I bought Roger's CD of the Magic Flute, and it was like, for the first time, hearing it, how it was playing in my head, how I wanted it to go in my head. And I was genuinely sort of quite moved by this recording where, all the andantes flowed, all the things that were alla breve, all this kind of stuff, and the sound and the vibrato, as we know, all this kind of thing. And so I found a way of getting in touch with him, and he very kindly said I could come to his house. So I went to his house and found out what his tipple of choice was. So I took him a bottle of that, and he said, "Oh, you're very informed." And we were supposed to meet for a couple of hours, and I stayed for the whole day. And eventually his wife came in and said, "Is Ben staying for lunch?" And so I did. Yeah. And he basically sent me away with a whole load of books to read and articles to read, and I read them. And he said, open invitation to attend any of his rehearsals. So I started going to rehearsals that I could get to. And after a couple of years, the opportunity to assist him came up, and it basically just meant that I would sort of traipse around after him and hang out in his rehearsals, and then go and badger him and tell him what I thought he was doing wrong. But no, I'm teasing. It was an amazing experience, and I learned so much from him. Funnily enough, actually, not just about the historically informed side, but actually just about how to run rehearsals, and actually also technically. I think it's one of the things he's not often given credit for is his sort of extremely economical use of gesture, extremely incisive, decisive gestures, and a really, particularly his kind of party pieces, the Beethoven symphonies and Symphonie Fantastique and the Brahms, these pieces that he's been doing for really decades. He'll often rehearse without a score, and he'll just say from this bit and sing the bit, and then the orchestra kind of goes, oh, and the concertmaster shouts, shouts out the bar number, and off they go. But I think that's potentially why it was sometimes quite helpful for him to have an assistant to sort of gently, occasionally remind him of bits of detail and things. But I learned a huge amount from him. And presumably it will come up in a minute. My job in Darmstadt, I owe entirely to him, actually.
Oh, and how do you owe it to Roger?
Well, so basically, the Deutsche Philharmonie, which is where I've been chief conductor since September 2017. They were looking for a new chief conductor sort of 18 months before that. And one of Roger's friends works in the marketing department, and she sent him a message and said, who's the new Roger Norrington? And he said, oh, you should try this guy. And so I just got a phone call from the intendant out of the blue while I was driving to a rehearsal, and he said, we've got your name from Roger Norrington. And I thought, ooh. And they asked me to go and do a concert. This will make you laugh. It was the first concert I did. So it was in July 2016. And it was the orchestra does a last night of the proms style concert every year, outdoor thing, with 3,000 Germans singing Land of Hope and Glory in Jerusalem. And Stefan, my boss, said to me, do you think 7 rehearsals will be enough? Of course, in the UK, this type of concert is almost invariably done on 1 3-hour rehearsal on the day.
Exactly.
So the thought of having 3 hours was just of having 7 times 3 hours was just hilarious.
Yeah.
So that was that really, and I went and did the concert, and it was really nice, and I loved them, and I think they didn't hate me, and I was asked back for another concert in March 2017, and then I was lucky enough to get the job. So I sort of owe that really entirely to Roger, actually.
I'm assuming, because we follow each other on social media or whatever else, and I've seen the sort of programs you do with Deutsche with Deutsche Philharmonie Merck. I'm assuming that with your HIP background, which you just explained was around before you met Sir Roger Norrington, but was probably deepened and greatened by meeting him. I'm assuming that you are quite hot on how you get the orchestra to sit, and all things like use of vibrato, and have you got the trumpets playing natural trumpets and timpani on calf heads and all of that? But going further on, are they then allowed to use their other instruments when you do 20th century stuff? Are they basically a malleable group of professionals who can put on a different hat for a different repertoire?
That is absolutely one of the things that right from the beginning I've worked out really hard with the orchestra, is getting this kind of flexibility. So in my first season, we opened my sort of first season as chief conductor with a Haydn symphony, Karen Sampson singing the Exultate and Mahler 4. And then in the November, we did some Brahms and Mendelssohn Reformation Symphony. And then in the January, what did we read? Korngold and Rachmaninoff, and so on through the season. So the idea was to, and I mean, I had already from the beginning sort of been talking to them a little bit about sound and vibrato and things, but actually getting them to, it's not just about making an orchestra play without vibrato, but getting them to think about how they use it.
Yes.
So, in Mahler we use a little bit, in Mendelssohn we use none. And for the entire week of Korngold and Rachmaninoff, I was badgering them to use more and more and more and more and more.
Yes.
So the lovely thing now is that it's a conversation that we have in every project, without, and it's just a given that there will be a discussion about it. And actually, if we're playing Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven, we don't even mention it.
Yeah.
Maybe if we have a couple of guests in, someone will kind of just say, by the way, you do know, don't you? But we do lots of kind of on the string bowings rather than all these kind of thrown spiccato strokes. There's a lot of talk about phrasing. As you mentioned, we almost always sit with first violin's left, second violin's right, and the basses in a row behind the woodwind, or on the left behind the first violins if we have kind of fewer than 4, I guess, double basses. And it's something they've been amazingly open to, and I think are quite interested in. I'm very, very lucky that Matthias, our leader, is very also interested in that kind of historically informed side of things, and he's been incredibly supportive. And yeah, I think I just try to make sure that we don't play too many projects back to back where, let's say, we're not using any vibrato, but just to kind of mix it up. And yeah, it's a really exciting thing to have an orchestra that actually wants to explore sound and doesn't just switch it on like a kind of carpet. It's really there as a decoration, and that's a really amazing thing for me. That's
great. It leads me on to the other thing that I would say that people know you for, and it couldn't be, I can't think of anybody else who does this, who has a real grasp and regular use of historically informed performance in one hat of their career, and that the other one is doing live music to film. And I can't think of it. It would be like Trevor Pinnock doing it, or it would be like Sir Roger Norrington doing it, or people I've spoken to on this podcast. How did that start? I'm assuming it was a Covent Garden Sinfonia thing that was the first time you did it, but now you do it. I would say, I mean, your latest job, literally a few weeks ago, was to be appointed the chief conductor of the Babylon Orchestra in Berlin, which they do silent films. So that's I can't think of anybody else who does it. So how did it start?
It was in 2013. I think I perhaps mentioned already with Covent Garden. We did the Berlioz Messe Solennelle and the Symphonie Fantastique in the Queen Elizabeth Hall. And I wrote to South Bank Centre afterwards, and I said, look, we'd love to do another show in the QEH. So let us know if you have any availability, because the dates are always sort of quite difficult to come by. And a little while later, they got in touch and said, we've got a prime Saturday in December in the QEH. Would you like to do some sort of family Christmas concert? And I thought, great, let's do the Snowman. Yeah. And then I thought, right, what do I do now then?
Yes.
So I got in touch with a brilliant colleague of mine called Mark Fitzgerald, who's got lots and lots of experience conducting live to picture.
Yes.
And he very kindly lent me a score of his and a DVD of, I think, of Nosferatu, just to sort of have an idea of how he marked up his scores and sort of how he did it.
Right.
And so I just sort of started, really, and it was amazing fun doing the Snowman. And yeah, it's kind of addictive, actually. Or I found it addictive.
Yeah.
I found it terrifying, but I found it completely addictive.
Agreed.
And we did it the next, yeah, because I know you've done it as well.
Yes.
We did it the next year, and then I rather foolishly thought it would be fun to do a Chaplin film, so we did The Gold Rush, which is 90 minutes of basically pure Mickey Mousing. There's no click track, there's no clock, there's no punches and streamers. You just have to take all your cues from the film.
Visual cues.
And it took me about 3 months to learn it, but it was one of the most exciting things I've ever done, and I was really hooked on it from then on. And we did Casablanca, we did Psycho, we did E.T., and I mean, it took rather longer than I had hoped it would, but eventually other orchestras sort of gradually got to know that I was a person who did that. And suddenly, I guess in about kind of 2016, 17, my diary sort of, I suppose, sort of slightly blew up, and I suddenly, half my work was doing film with orchestra concerts. So I mean, it was 2017 that my job in Darmstadt began. So my life changed pretty rapidly in that year, really.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right that when I began doing films live to picture, my first impression was this could not be more different from conducting a Haydn symphony. It's just it's like completely different ends of the conducting spectrum, right? And then as I got more into doing it, and syncing with the film became less of a challenge. I don't mean less of a challenge in that it becomes less difficult, because that's really the most difficult thing, actually, is making the music fit with the film and making it happen in a way that kind of feels organic, so that the audience is just watching the film and then suddenly someone punches somebody on the screen and there's a bang in the orchestra or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the more experience I had doing that, the less that became terrifying. And it's something, I mean, I don't think I'm in any sense a sort of great conductor, but I'm very, very good at being absolutely always in the right place and making sure I hit all those sync points. And as I was doing more and more of these films, I actually realized that the thing I was caring much more about was trying to get the right sound, trying to get the right articulations. And really, it became much closer to this kind of historically informed thing that I had always been really interested in. It just happened that I was doing, let's say, I don't know, Jurassic Park, which, was a film score from 1993 rather than a Haydn symphony from 1793. And one of the big joys for me of doing these films is actually really trying to recreate as nerdily as possible exactly what was on the original soundtrack. And of course, what's lovely about it is that, we could, I'm sure, probably sit down for an hour and have a rather heated discussion about performance practice in Elgar, or, well, maybe not, let's say, in Brahms or Dvorak or Schumann or something like that. But for pretty much all of the film soundtracks that have ever been made, we have first-hand evidence of how they actually sounded when they were written. And that I find deeply satisfying, being able to, work with an orchestra to make them sound like an orchestra from the 1920s or the 1940s or 30s or 60s or 80s or whatever it is. And of course, the challenge is always to make sure that you're synchronized with the film, but it's much more than that as well. I really love both doing classical concerts and conducting films, and I don't think I'd be without either, really.
No. Well, there are 2 points to come out of that. Is that the first one is, I'm not surprised that you feel the historically informed performance element is attached to both, because they both have rather partisan sort of audiences. You know, I've done John Williams concerts, and then you go online and you discover there's a John Williams fan forum, and they did give detailed reviews of your concerts and say, well, you know, it was exactly the right feeling and the right tempo of this and exactly the right tempo of that. Why did he cut out the last 3 bars of Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter? You know, all of these sort of things. And so you have people who are really have strong opinions about their film music and about their you know, exactly the same as it is with Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and however far back or forward you want to go with that. The second thing I would say is that lucky you for having done so many that you can now worry less about the syncing. You know, I've done one film. I did North by Northwest.
I was there.
You were there? Ah, wow.
Yeah, I was just behind you.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the orchestra weren't just behind me; they were just with me. But so it was a cheesy joke, but I couldn't resist it. And you know, there was one sync point I had to hit. Really had to hit. Most of them were dead easy. There was a car crash that was dead easy. There was one gunshot I had to hit, and I stressed more about that gunshot than anything else. About as much as I stress about the snowball hitting the window pane in The Snowman, you know. But I've just done 5 of those in a row with the Trondheim Symphony Orchestra. It should have been 8, but you know, Norway changed the rules and I had to fly home early. By the 5th performance, I was not worrying at all about the snowball because I knew I was in the right place and I knew what I was doing. And I think it is that level of confidence of just doing it more often that you feel, you know, actually now. You know, and I felt I could shape things, and I knew that, you know, if I got half a bar out, I could pick it up in 25 bars time or whatever else. That you know, you could make a musical point of picking up the tempo to get the sync points right. But when you first do it, as you just said, it is exhilarating yet frightening because you just stress about the most bizarre of things. I found I stressed about it. You know, I mean, for instance, sorry, for instance, the overture of North by Northwest, or the opening titles, you know, it was not recorded to click. It was just Bernard Herrmann conducting in the studio in 1950, whatever it was. Through many goes home in my study here with the score and watching the punches and streamers on the film, I realized that they've rushed like hell early on, but then dragged like hell later on. So if I kept a steady tempo, I'd get about a bar behind the soundtrack. But I knew that there was nothing I had to hit particularly in the main titles, and I knew that eventually the original would come back to me, and it always did, you know. But those sort of things, you know, I lost sleep over thinking, how am I going to follow these, you know, this wobbly rubato-y score from the late 50s? Well, it turns out that, you know, it was very possible. The tricky one was the gunshot, and sorry, I never hit it. Never hit it.
My first feeling when I first started conducting to film was it was a little bit like working with the worst soloist you've ever met. You know, they don't listen to you, they don't wait for you, they don't follow. They just do what they
just keep going.
And they just keep going. And the very first time I rehearsed The Snowman with my laptop there, and it was just terrifying because you sort of, in your heart of hearts, thought maybe the film was just somehow going to wait for you, and it doesn't. And of course, what you learn is that you can do as much practice as you like at home, but actually how the orchestra responds to your gestures never comes out exactly as you maybe think it will. And that has been the really sort of big lesson, is that I'm now hyper aware of how an orchestra responds to my gestures. And it's one of the things I have to get to grips with when I meet a new orchestra and, you know, we're doing a Beauty and the Beast or a Harry Potter or you know, whatever it is. In the first 5 minutes, I've got to learn exactly where they play. And I've got to adjust what I do to make them play where I need to. And, you know, if it's, say, a German orchestra and they play a little bit behind the beat, but as I do for one of the Bond films or for Beauty and the Beast, I have a click track, but they don't. I sometimes have to conduct quite far ahead of the click to get them to sound with the click that's in my ear. So, you know, but you know, again, that's just something that I sort of have got used to. But the the sort of amazing thing really is that the films I've conducted a lot, so, you know, Raiders and Jaws and Jurassic Park and E.T. and, well, now Metropolis with this orchestra in Berlin that I've done sort of 13, 14 times in the last couple of months. You actually, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but I have the feeling almost as if I'm sort of dancing with the film. I know exactly how every cut happens. I know exactly how the music should interact. And when you have a couple of performances in a row, you know, if you're doing a 7 or 8 shows, you know, sort of over a couple of weeks, you have a chance each night to think, okay, last night I hit that, but I wonder actually if I moved just a tiny bit more through this bar here, and that would give the opportunity for the orchestra not just to be together with this thing that's the sync point, but actually for the kind of bloom of the orchestra to be exactly with the cut. So that means I want to put my downbeat a little bit early, you know, just these very, very kind of nerdy things. But what's nice about it is that it becomes then not just a kind of intellectual, can I be in the right place, but it becomes a really artistic thing. And I feel, particularly with doing these long silent films like Metropolis, where you know, there's no technology to help you and you have to take all your cues from the picture, you can really do lots of sort of quite interesting shaping, ebbing and flow things, and also, you know, changing dynamics just kind of spontaneously with the orchestra, because the orchestra has to be with you in every moment, because if you suddenly stretch out your third beat to catch something on the one, they have to all catch that. And so it's something I really love doing, and the more I do it, the less I feel like it's a sort of technical thing, and more it's a really sort of, I hope, artistic thing. And I mean, certainly the other thing that I love about it is, you know, usually we have amazing audiences for this, because it's not just like a classical concert where people come because they like music. You get people who come for the music, but you also get people who love the films. And I remember doing the German premiere of Azkaban a couple of years ago, and I don't think I've ever seen so many young people, you know, not like a kind of family concert audience where it's sort of young kids, but you know, just teenagers and people in their early 20s, and everyone wearing kind of Harry Potter scarves and t-shirts and stuff. It's just a most amazing thing.
One final question, which as a regular listener you'll know is coming. It's about score prep and learning a score. I wonder whether this is going to be a 2-part answer, because, you know, learning a score for a you know, live to picture is probably very different from learning your Haydn symphonies. So how do you do it? Are you a inner ear person? Do you use a keyboard? Are you a scribbler, red, blue, and black? Or are you? I'm assuming you must be for the film, but are you for a symphony concert? How do you go about learning a new score?
You're absolutely right. Definitely a 2-part answer. I, for all scores, will go through. The first thing I'll do, and I will highlight in yellow any tempo markings, tempo modifications, rubato things. So anything like that gets yellow highlighter. I used to do more of, and I now do less of, doing the kind of bracket of the strings in green. I do still do it now, particularly when there's lots of divisi, because I have a sort of way of doing it so that I can see at a glance that it's all the violins who are divided into 4 or 5 staves here, and then just viola, cello, bass, whatever.
Yes.
And I know, as other conductors have said on this podcast, part of it, it's sort of almost a bit like a ritual for me. You know, I'm learning the score, but it actually also means that I'm making myself go through every single page, every single system. I'm looking, I'm sort of absorbing, and it's sort of that slightly worshipful act of doing that means that that's my sort of first kind of look through the piece, if you like. If I'm lucky enough to have lots of time before the concert, you know, if it's months or years before, I'll get the score as soon as I can, put those sort of first initial markings in, and then I'll usually read through a couple of times. I won't use a piano. I'll tend not to listen to recordings at that point. and I'll just try to read it like a book and imagine it as best as I can and sort of make some decisions. I usually then put it away for a few months and come back to it. And usually when I'm a sort of couple of months before the show, I might listen to a couple of recordings, and it's at the point that the recordings start to annoy me that I know I'm ready to conduct the piece myself. Because it's not playing how I'd like it to go in my head. And of course, sometimes one finds a recording that, you know, you agree with entirely, and that's lovely and it's useful. But it's a difficult thing, isn't it? I'm really adamant that I shouldn't be influenced by tradition, and I think often orchestras are quite shocked when I sometimes don't do the usual things in the usual places. Listening to recordings is interesting, but I mean, for instance, the pieces that I learned as a trumpet player, I quite often have to study much, even though I know them and I know the structures and I sort of know them kind of by ear, I actually have to study much more intently, because I really have to go back to actually what's printed and make myself see through what I think I know. You know, I think I know how this piece goes in my head, and then I actually look and say, well, this is actually not at all what's written in the metronome mark. Is this, you know, like first movement of Tchaik 5 is actually much faster than it's normally played. For example, I don't know. But in terms of marking up the score, so I don't really write very much. I sometimes write in a little bit of shaping stuff, a couple of hairpins here and there. I quite often put in bar structures. Those are very, very important to me and very helpful for me for sort of absorbing bigger chunks. But I don't really write anything else much. However, when I'm learning a film, well, let me put it this way: if in the case of a house fire, I'd save my family and then I'd go back for my silent film scores. I'd let the hardback Mozart symphonies burn, but I would go straight for my Chaplin scores.
At this point, Ben explained how he meticulously marks up his scores for film, especially his system for silent films, and how that differs from his markings for a standard concert. If you want to hear that short discussion, I've turned it into a Patreon-exclusive bonus mini-episode. For as little as £5 a month, you can gain access to this mini-episode, as well as all of the previous 15 mini-episodes. You'll also get a monthly bulletin podcast from me about my career, as well as advanced news about this podcast. You also get an interview once a month with a prominent person from the classical music world who has dealings with conductors, as well as articles, essays, and all sorts of other conducting-based content. The details of how to join are in the show notes below, and I'd love to see you subscribe to the Supporters Club of A Mic on the Podium very soon. Now, it's time for the 10 questions with my guest, Ben Palmer. Ben, as a regular listener, you'll know what's coming. It's the 10 questions, and it's what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
Right. So this is a bit of a strange one. Well, actually, there are two things, really. One of the things, I'm sure someone else has said this, I don't know if they have, but I love the sound of the oboe's tuning A. It's always been a sound that I've sort of found quite moving. There's this sort of moment where you know, a bunch of people, everyone kind of comes in and handshakes and hugs and all this kind of thing. And suddenly this A sounds, and all of these people, it might be 10 people, it might be 100 people, suddenly kind of melt down into this unit. And I don't think I've ever been more moved really than the first time I heard that after 6 months of COVID, when I got to go to Darmstadt. And I remember hearing the oboe A and just feeling a little tear trickle down my cheeks. Anyway, so that's my sort of serious answer. My slightly more stupid answer is I really like things that beep and drone and things, you know, so like lorries reversing, right. Or you know, if you go into a bathroom somewhere and there's the fans humming on a particular note, and I can never resist, you know, like, I don't know, doing some sort of thinking or whistling or humming some kind of polyrhythm against the against the beep, or singing some line against the drone. I don't know. It's the sort of thing that drives my wife absolutely insane. So those are noises that I like. And ironically, the noise that I hate is any kind of background music.
Agreed.
I just can't deal with it at all. I have fitted earplugs that I carry with me everywhere. And I just, if I'm in a restaurant, if I'm in a cafe, I can't bear it.
Well, I agree about music or background music or whatever. I hate it as well. Though your choice, the first choice of the A sounding, I absolutely love, especially as you said after COVID, it meant that the world was returning to whatever, something. For me, also that sound is the sort of it's the alarm bell that means that I'm about 30 seconds away from walking onto the stage at the beginning of a concert. And for me, and I know this has come up in a previous podcast, it's for me the worst time is the 5 minutes before you go on. I'm nervous then when I'm never normally nervous. And so the minute that A strikes up, you think, right, I'm only 30 seconds away from getting out there and the nerves going, and then it becoming exciting. And so it's a double-edged thing for me. It's not just the sound of, as you said, suddenly 85 people becoming a unit through the sound of one note. It also means to me that the excitement's about to begin, and the nerves can go and then I can get out there and do it. So it's a sound I love as well. If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
So I think I would, in an ideal world, I would just wake up when I wake up, no alarms, no 3-year-old son, just wake up as it happens, have a sort of delicious breakfast. I guess probably that, I don't know, would be made for me or something, but just like lots of nice pastries and some bacon and like delicious scrambled eggs and amazing coffee and things. And then I would take my almost 3.5-year-old dinosaur obsessed son to the Natural History Museum, because I still think doesn't have any concept of how enormous dinosaurs are. I just really want to see his face the moment he sees the T-Rex.
Yes.
So we spent a couple of hours doing that. And you've said ideally away from music. One of the things I have found sad about, I suppose, being busier myself as a conductor, is that I have very few opportunities to go to concerts, other people's concerts. And so my ideal thing would be to somehow magically go from my home in London to, I don't know, Vienna or New York or something with my wife, and we'd go and have a really nice date night dinner somewhere, and then go to an amazing concert with an amazing orchestra and an amazing program and an amazing conductor. And I think that would be a pretty amazing day, really.
It would be. Yeah, I mean, what I said, dear listener, I always send everybody I interview an email with the 10 questions on, because unlike Ben, many of the conductors don't know the podcast exists and don't listen to it, so they need to know what the questions are. I do normally specify, please don't talk about music or conducting in your 24 hours off, but actually going to a concert is different. We rarely go. I went to one recently. I was working in Cologne with the WDR Funkhouse Orchestra, and I went to watch the LPO under Ed Gardner at the Philharmonie one evening. It was a wonderful way to spend the evening. Orchestra, I've conducted quite a lot, and it was nice to hear them from the other side. But yeah, it was a great way of spending 2.5 hours or whatever it was. And yeah, I will allow it, very much allow it. And I'm surprised.
I think there's.
Yeah, I'm surprised more people haven't chosen that as an option.
Yeah, there's something very, very different about listening to music, literally just for the pleasure of listening, rather than listening in a kind of work capacity, either because you're conducting or because you're assisting or whatever it is. But actually, when you're just there as an audience, it's a completely different thing, and I really miss it.
Who would be a favourite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
Well, this is a really interesting one, because had I done this podcast interview a few months ago, I would have given a completely different answer. But seeing as he has officially said that he is retiring from the concert platform, I'm going to say Roger Norrington. So he would have been my favourite current conductor, which I know is one of the forthcoming questions. I've spoken already at length what a hero I think he is. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of him as a musician and as a conductor, and yeah, it makes me actually quite sad how aggressive some people are about his approach.
Yeah.
Musicians and also reviewers and critics sometimes. There seems to be this sort of feeling that somehow musicians have a sort of God-given right to vibrate, and anyone who stands in the way of that is somehow the devil incarnate. And he comes in for an awful lot of, or has come in for an awful lot of vitriol from people about that. But when you sort of think about the other indulgences that other conductors take, that, in my opinion, are much more extreme than asking an orchestra to play with less or no vibrato. Anyway, so he's definitely one person, and the other person is Bernard Haitink, who has conducted some of the most amazing live performances I've ever been to. I remember going to watch him do a Beethoven 2 with the LSO, which I think is on their LSO Live, and he sort of looked like he was barely moving, just for sort of most of the first movement, just these very, very small, very controlled movements. And the big chain of suspensions towards the end of the first movement, where the trumpets and horns sort of explode. And he just turned to the trumpets and just sort of opened his shoulders, and it was like a bomb going off. And it was it's the most incredible lesson in less is more.
Yeah.
And his Mahler 3 with LSO, I just think he was absolutely one of the greatest. So Roger still very much with us, and for a long time, I hope. But I hope he won't mind being called a conductor of yesteryear, because he's officially retired.
Well, it's a shame, but sadly, it was likely as a fact that it was going to happen, that from episode 1 to now, past episode 100, that somebody has gone from being somebody's favourite current conductor to somebody's favourite conductor of yesteryear, and that's a shame with Bernard Haitink, and also Roger not deciding to call it a day. And don't you think that every art needs mavericks? Whether you think Roger's a maverick or not, but every art needs somebody who's gonna just change what everybody else is doing and think about it in a different way, and it creates discussion, it creates arguments. Sadly, as you said, it creates vitriol of some of the language that's used is bizarre, that somebody could think that they can publish things like that. But I think that the world needs people like that in everything. It needs it in sport. It needs it in politics sometimes. But it definitely needs it in art. And good.
Absolutely. And I think the thing sometimes that perhaps we all forget is that even if a conductor conducts the most appalling interpretation of a piece, goes completely against the composer's wishes, speeds are all wrong, changed instrumentation, whatever, the piece will still exist tomorrow. It doesn't matter.
Yes. Yeah.
The music will still be there. Sort of the same way I feel about arrangements. Lots of people get their knickers in a twist about people making arrangements of Mahler symphonies for 12 players. No one's ever suggesting it should replace the original. It's just it's just something interesting,
Yes.
So I'm very much sort of let live sort of person. Yeah.
Well, let's see if there are any mavericks as your choice of question 5, which is favourite current conductors or conductor.
It's so hard, Mike. It's so difficult.
I know.
There are so many people whom I really admire, and I think for instance, some of the best sort of 20th century concerts I've ever heard have been with Esa-Pekka Salonen in Philharmonia. Paavo Järvi doing Beethoven's just pretty unbeatable for me. I think François-Xavier Roth is amazing. Particularly loved his sort of period instrument, early French and Russian stuff. There are so many people, it's really kind of difficult to pin down. There's a guy called Ernst van Thiel who does lots of film with orchestra concerts, so I think not particularly well known outside that world, but he's just absolutely amazing at it. He's absolutely He's incredibly. He recorded the soundtrack for The Artist,
Right. Okay.
and he's just very, very small gestures. Often doesn't use a baton, but he's sort of very, very commanding in a very quiet way. I just saw him once rehearsing in Lucerne. We had kind of shows on alternate days, and it was quite sweet. We came to each other's rehearsals and sat in the same seat before we realised. So you sort of watch the screen and watch the monitor.
Yeah.
He'd just be rehearsing, and something wouldn't quite work, and so he'd stop. He'd say 2 words, and then he'd just do it again. And it just so many conductors out there to admire. I think it's really. It's always lovely to find conductors who are really sort of that repertoire in which they can really shine. I think that's the big thing.
What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to give 2 answers to this as well, if I may.
Of course you may. Yes.
Thank you. The first answer is. Which is also a sort of double answer, so it's sort of 3 answers now. Sorry, is Sibelius 7 and Mahler 7, the 2 symphonies that I think I've sort of sweated the most over in terms of just sitting at my desk trying to make them make sense in my head. Particularly the finale of Mahler 7, which is just so enormous, and have these sort of these different tempi that have to sort of relate to each other, and they have to be different enough but not so different that the whole thing comes unstuck, and you somehow have to get to the end and feel as if it's all added up to something, which I suppose is a way of describing the whole of Sibelius 7 as well. I think that those are the 2 pieces, technically sort of not anything particularly tricky. I mean the Mahler of course is hard, but it's just getting those to make sense in my head took me a really long time. So that's my first answer. And the second part is I'm slightly blaming COVID for this. Is the Charlie Chaplin film Modern Times, which I was supposed to conduct in March last year with Covent Garden Sinfonia. That was cancelled. It was supposed to be in December last year with my new orchestra in Berlin, Babylon Orchestra Berlin. That was also cancelled, and it's now about to be rescheduled for some time in 2022. It is the hardest silent film to do, Modern Times. It was recorded. The original soundtrack was recorded by Alfred Newman, who wrote the famous 20th Century Fox fanfare, and. It's a silent film which is only available to certain conductors. You have to be sort of authorized by the Chaplin estate to do it. And I've done Gold Rush a few times, so they know me, and they know I'll take it seriously. But you have to sign a sort of contract, basically promising to prepare the film properly. And so now, sort of about 2.5 times, I've sat down to start learning Modern Times, and it is just absolutely insanely hard, because it sounds like this, there's a great sort of big romantic themes, and then all this very, very fast factory music, where Charlie Chaplin's sort of at the production line, and he's with a spanner, and someone's hitting a sort of thing, and and each one of those has to be perfectly synchronized with the actions on screen. But both times I've sort of got part of the way through learning it, and then the shows get cancelled. So it's the most. So it's in a way cheating, because I haven't actually conducted it, but I know when it comes round, it's going to cost me an awful lot of weeks and weeks, if not months and months, to really make sure that it's absolutely safe by the time I meet the orchestra.
Well, as somebody who's conducted so many silent films, if you can see on the paper before you've even conducted it, it's the hardest one you've ever done. It's obviously an allowable answer. Sibelius 7 is another one which I'm not sure how many times it's come up, not often, but it's like orienteering or something like that. You've got to know where the next waypoint is and how fast you've got to get there. Classical rallying, where everything's done on a stopwatch. You know that the tempo you're at now has got to get to a different tempo in 150 or 9 pages time. And if you get that wrong, well, that's going to affect what happens at that point. And to make it make sense, and you're always always sort of fiddling in your mind. Have I gone too soon? No, I'm okay. Am I too fast? No, I'm okay.
That's exactly. I don't think there's any other piece that I know where the tempo you take in the first bar has a bigger impact on the way that the whole piece unfolds. You know, your starting tempo. You know, it's like some kind of alternate universe thing. If you take a different starting tempo, you will eventually end up in a different place at the end. It's just it's absolutely mind frying.
Yeah. When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Well, I know I'm expressly there are a list of items I'm expressly forbidden from choosing. One of which I believe is a suitcase I'm not allowed to mention. So I'm hoping that I may be allowed around that by mentioning I have a rucksack, a special rucksack. It's called a riot bag, RIUT. I think it stands for something like revolution in user thinking. Anyway, riot bag. Yeah. And it is the only rucksack I've found that can hold A3 scores and batons and, you know, laptop and iPad and water bottles. And it's got all the pockets are against your back. So it sort of opens against your back. So in and of itself, it's not really a thing I can't travel without, but it carries all of the things that I have to take with me in my hand luggage. It is the most marvelous thing. I'm on my third one. Not actually because the first two have not because anything bad's happened to them, because they're built incredibly well, but just because the new one came out and I couldn't not have it. But I think it's got a sort of 35 litre capacity, which means I can literally get, you know, four or five big A3 scores in and everything else I need. So
I wonder whether other conductors are obsessed with luggage. For instance, I have a Remover suitcase.
Same here. Yeah, I've got a little one and a big one. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know, I looked at another company to try and get a carry-on or a roll-on, because I use a wheelie bag, as my kids call it, for all of my scores and chargers and I Macs and all that sort of stuff. And this one was beautiful, and it was exactly what I wanted to do. It had a charging thing, but it was about a centimetre short of taking an A3 score. So that was it. Deal breaker. If I can't get an A3 score in a bag, well, I ain't buying it. That's the end of argument. So
it's literally it's the only rucksack I found that, and also it's sort of a little bit like Mary Poppins's handbag. It doesn't look that enormous. So you sort of sometimes when if you sort of turn up at the gate and they sort of look suspiciously at people wearing, these huge backpack things and say, oh, that's not going to go in hand luggage. It looks much smaller than it is, but I've not really managed to fill it yet. So,
Number 8. What's the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
There's the really obvious thing. I love traveling, I love flying, but the time it actually takes to travel and, being away from your family, that's the sort of obvious thing. The thing that I wish we could change is as follows. As conductors, we get, I think, very often pigeonholed. Sometimes that's kind of by design, sometimes it's sort of by accident. For a while I was the Haydn historically informed guy, and now I'm the kind of film with orchestra guy. Lots of the other conductors you've spoken to have, sort of been pigeonholed in some way, whether it's as a ballet conductor or a conductor of show music or an opera conductor or whatever. And I suppose my wish would be that we don't somehow, that we're a bit kinder about the pigeonholes and that we don't treat them as a negative thing. People often say to me, I've had sort of agents and people from orchestras, oh, aren't you worried about, being pigeonholed as the film guy? And, my answer is always, well, would I rather be conducting the Halle and the BBC orchestras and going to Montreal and Antwerp and wherever and conducting films, or would I rather not be doing those things?
Exactly.
You often hear people talking about film music as if it's something they've stepped in, and I don't know. I feel as if pigeonholing doesn't need to be a bad thing. And I think also having been pigeonholed, we sometimes assume that they can't do anything else. And my wish, I suppose, would be that we'd just be a bit more generous with people about, not just saying that person only does this sort of stuff, or saying, isn't it fantastic that this person is a real specialist at doing this particular thing? Wouldn't it be interesting to see them do something else? And, I think it also goes to sort of training things. I mean, as discussed, I've never really sort of studied conducting. I spent my 10 years, how would you put it, sort of 10 years in the trenches, kind of conducting amateur orchestras and choral societies and student orchestras. And I had an absolutely amazing time doing that. And I mean, I know you work with some amateur orchestras that you absolutely adore. And it's taught me everything I know. And I'm incredibly proud to have spent that time doing it. But there are an awful lot of people who, maybe look down on people who work with amateurs. And I just find that a bit sad, because, everybody has their own way to sort of getting to where they're going to end up, and that might be in a pigeonhole, it might not be. I don't know. I just
well, you're talking, you're preaching to the converted, because, as you know, I've conducted amateur orchestras. I now only conduct two, but that's because I love working with both of them. I used to sit there when I was playing and still at the CBSO and conducting and thinking, I wonder how you'd get on with my amateur orchestra if you tried to fix that corner. Or I wonder if you stood in front of my amateur orchestra conducted like that, what sound would come out? Because I think the answer would be pretty horrendous for you. Sometimes, maybe we should swap roles. The other thing about pigeonholing, I couldn't agree more with you. But I do think that by having, you are very similar to me in the fact that, there are orchestras in this country who think I'm the schools and family guy. There are other orchestras I work with who think, well, actually, he conducts contemporary music really well. CBSO basically give me anything and everything. And, whereas I go to other places, I'm the guy who conducts the film music concerts for them and presents them. I don't mind being put in those pigeonholes if I go and work in those places, and because I enjoy working there. But there is an extra level above that, which is there are some orchestras around the world, for instance, WDR Funkhaus in Cologne and the BBC Concert Orchestra, where actually it's a good thing to have conducted many in many different styles, in many different genres. They wouldn't worry about booking you because you've done film and you've done light music and you've done Broadway and you've done ink, still, wet, contemporary, fly shit, squeaky gate. You've done everything, and therefore they're happy. They all come in because we want to play everything all in one concert, and we've got somebody here who has done everything, and so. Therefore, with the pigeonholing, fine, pigeonhole me all you like, but I think it's good to. I don't consider it to be a bad thing, whereas some people do. They really do. So here, yeah, there we go. Number 9. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think I said as a teenager I would have wanted to be a cartoonist. The problem with that was I could never really decide what to draw. So maybe I'd probably it would be like my composing now, but probably even more frustrating. So I think if I couldn't be a musician, I would probably want to be some sort of writer or perhaps a photographer. I really love writing. I don't really know what, some kind of journalism, maybe a novelist. I have no idea. And I really enjoy taking photos, even though it's something I know absolutely nothing about. But probably something along those lines, I think.
Something creative,
or a pilot, but we all know conductors who have taken that slightly more seriously. So I think that one's probably that answer.
And you can join the list of other conductors who've said pilot on this podcast. Yeah, it's getting nearer double figures than single figures now.
Sure.
And finally, if the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Right. So. I really like steak, and we're talking steak that's so rare that a good vet could bring it back. And the thing I'm always sad about when I'm in a really nice steak restaurant is the Chateaubriand, and it always says for two. Yeah. And so if this were really my last meal on earth, I'd order the Chateaubriand for two, but just for me. Yeah. So I probably wouldn't have a starter. I just have this huge steak. Like a bucket of béarnaise sauce, some really nice kind of slightly thin cut fries, and I'd be very, very happy in some sort of vegetables, but basically loads of béarnaise, loads of very, very, very blue steak, and fries, and I'd be very happy. And then I suppose maybe some Rioja, and then I don't know. I mean, probably an apple crumble. I don't think there's anything. There's nothing I like more. So that would probably be it. I think, really.
As long as the ratio of crumble to apple is about 50-50, I'm with you.
I completely agree. Completely agree. And ice cream and custard and everything. If it's the last one, we're going all out. And a really nice double espresso macchiato at the end.
Very, very, very good choice. Ben, it's been a real joy chatting, as I knew it would be, and I hope in the very near future we can sit down and chat some more. It'll probably be about syncing to film, or it may even be about vibrato in Brahms. Who knows? But I know we'll enjoy chatting. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be on the podcast. Thanks, Mike. All the best.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with an American conductor who won the Sir George Solti competition in 2004. Since then, he's held title positions in Switzerland, Germany, Norway and the Netherlands, and from 2023 he will be music director in 2 opera houses, in Valencia and in Berlin. But until then, bye-bye.